Welcome back, everyone, to the final session of this year's conference. And in this session, we're going to share some great conversations reflecting on the key themes of the last 2 days and, of course, looking at where we go from here. So let me introduce to you our panellists who have joined me on the stage already. We have, of course, Janet Anderson, the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner, and the first of our representatives from the pre-conference workshops, which were held on Monday. Now, there are a number of groups from the workshops, and Janet will introduce each of the groups as they come up on stage to deliver their brief summaries of those workshop activities and discussions. And then after those conversations, Amy Laffan, First Assistant Secretary at the Department of Health and Aged Care, will be with us to provide some observations and to discuss the next steps on this journey a little later in this session this afternoon. And Janet is going to lead this session, but I'm going to remain here on stage just to assist, if necessary, with timing as the representatives deliver their workshop reports. So as I hand over to Janet, will you please give a very warm welcome to our first panel of representatives.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Now, this is a precision timing event, and as Richard was saying, he's going to be the time steward, and we've given each of the panellists a particular challenge to present succinctly an hour and a half's conversation in a few pithy points, taking no more than 5 minutes each. And this is the format that we're going to reproduce 3 times over to bring forward from the work we did on Monday in 9 workshops involving over 200 participants, because we did get a lot of feedback from individuals who were there and those who weren't able to get into those workshops, that they're very keen to understand what was discussed there as well. So we thought this was a really useful way of drawing into the larger forum, for those of you who weren't able to get there, what was discussed in those really interesting workshops. We got a lot of really positive feedback. The most prominent piece of feedback was more please. So we're going to take that on board and see what might be changed for next time round, next year, so that we can allow more of you access or diversify the topics and whatever the feedback is. Speaking of which, of course, all of you will be completing the evaluation survey at the end so that we can hear your voice in that regard. But let me now proceed to introduce the panel members, moving from my left to my right, your right to your left, is Alison Kelleher from the District Nurses, Brian Lippman, who's the CEO of Wintringham, and Kay Coates from Southern Cross Care. Now, Alison is up first. She has her mic ready, and her topic, in the course of 5 minutes, was Open Disclosure, a Provider Superpower. Alison.
Thanks, Janet. Our workshop on open disclosure was facilitated by Louise McLeod, the Complaints Commissioner, and we had a really great discussion in that workshop. We talked about open disclosure being the superpower in aged care to quickly and effectively resolve complaints with family members and the aged person as well. So the Commission really wants to promote open disclosure across the sector, because we know that it actually works to help close off complaints. So yes, it is our superpower. The key themes that were raised during the workshop, the participants raised a number of observations and questions, just talking about how open disclosure is not universally used across the sector. We need to think about open disclosure in terms of reframing the conversation with our clients and our residents around a positive discussion rather than a negative discussion. Timeliness, so when we actually undertake open disclosure and how soon after the event and when is it going to be most effective. When we know that the OD process is finalised, and how do we actually close that off and what's the next step? How do we continuously improve that process? How do we help our staff deliver open disclosure effectively? How do we train them and support them? And best practice, what does that look like? What resources are available to support us? We also talked about the roles and responsibilities of staff managers and board members in the open disclosure space. You know, what role do they have? What information do people need to look at and review? And what should we be reporting on? We then talked about all of these things in a little bit more detail, so I'll go through those, and I have 3 minutes left. So we talked about open disclosure being really important to undertake immediately after an incident. So it's really important that staff who are at the scene know how to actually undertake open disclosure and know how to have those conversations. We talked about the challenges that then presents for training of staff and supporting staff. So with new staff, you know, how do we teach them open disclosure, effective open disclosure? How do we maintain that ongoing training beyond induction, keeping people current? And there was a discussion around actually having people undertake a little bit of a refresher before they go through a difficult open disclosure conversation, which was a really good point. We talked about the impact of cultural differences, where some staff may not be able to feel comfortable to have direct conversations. We talked about how you train agency staff across all sorts of things like SIRS and open disclosure and incident reporting. We talked about things that negatively impact the effectiveness of open disclosure. Some people are still really concerned about, you know, the fear of undertaking those conversations and whether or not they're going to get into trouble for admitting that they're wrong. We talked about the importance of really being open and listening and showing empathy and respect to the people that you're talking to when talking about adverse events. We talked about how it's in our nature to be fairly protective of ourselves and jump to the defence, and that will actually block our ability to listen and be effective during those conversations. So the EAR model was mentioned as a useful way of actually reframing those conversations, so thinking about empathy, attention and respect. We talked about continuously improving the process of open disclosure and how should we do that, and was there an ability to actually feed back all the learnings from the sector, how you effectively deliver open disclosure, and have some sort of forum or education piece or you know, resources that where we can share knowledge around that. We talked about the new Aged Care Act and how open disclosure will fit with that. And then we went on to talk about, okay, what can we do from here? So what actions can the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission take? So we talked about the ALIS education model and the promotion of that across the sector, and using the resources that are available. I think there's a 6-minute video available on the Commission's website on open disclosure. It's a really quick refresher. Commission could incorporate reviewing providers' open disclosure process and effectiveness, and publishing case studies. So we do need an open and consistent approach, and provide support and training to all our staff, and be really, really aware that timing is critical with effective open disclosure.
Wow. She ran 2 seconds under the clock. That's brilliant. And well done. There's a lot of ground covered there in the hour and a half you spent together. It's really valuable. Brian, your turn. And you were talking about, your workshop was hearing the voice of older people.
Yes, and we hit the jackpot in our session. We had the chair of Council of Elders, we had the boss of SIRS, we had 2 commissioners, plus a lively group of engaged providers. In fact, it was probably one of the few workshops I've ever been involved in which it could have gone longer. In fact, I said to Janet that maybe if she hadn't been as mean and put some wine on the table, we could have got started and more effective conversations quicker. Nevertheless, much was achieved. One of the things I guess we did agree on is that much of the aged care system is designed around the needs of middle-class people. And part of that concept is that they have a loving family who will be assertive or lobby on behalf of mum and dad. So the question really is, how do we engage with the disengaged? And Anne Burgess was particularly good in reminding us of the enormous power imbalance in aged care. This is particularly of concern to me in my work with the elderly homeless who have had a lifelong disempowerment, and how do you begin to even encroach on that and to engage them. We had lots of anecdotes, which I think is the best way to describe some of our conversations, amusing, heartfelt, and it helped people express their opinions. There was one particular story which struck me of a worker, a manager who told me when she told the group when she was young and just started managing, she inherited a property and a client who insisted, an ex-farmer, on clearing the blackberries. And all of her older staff members advised this is very unwise to do. But she persevered and worked with that guy. Not only did he clear the blackberries, but he became a valued and engaged member of the community of the facility. So there's all sorts of ways to engage people. And similar with that is our own at Winteringham's concept of a badge of honour as complaints. For a homeless person to complain, that's something to be very proud of. In fact, I have a memory of a very belligerent and angry, illiterate homeless client sitting down with a young worker who dictated to her his complaint against her. And I thought how wonderful that is, that A, he feels confident he can do that, and that she, as a young worker, didn't think she was going to lose her job because of it. So I thought that was really inspiring. So what actions can providers take? We looked at a range of tools, and particularly we were educated about the sunflower tool and also referencing Bill Eddy. But all agreed that regardless, providers need to show genuine interest and hearing the voices of older people, and more than just hearing it, willingness to respect their wishes and to continue. And that this isn't just seen as a tick box exercise, but it's something that's core to the values of the organisations. And finally, from a personal perspective, I think that we as an industry need to remind government that developing a trusting relationship with disengaged older people takes time and therefore money. People are entitled to a quality of life, not just a quality of care.
Well done. Thank you, Brian. Now, before I invite Kay to summarise the workshop in which she participated, I also want to invite you to ask questions of the panellists. We have provided time at the end of each of the sequence of 3 to hear from you. If you have particular questions of the panel members or you would like to offer a comment, this is your moment. And genuinely, we want this to be part of an exercise which embraces you as well. And if you have any thoughts, please feel free to share them. There will be time, not a lot, but time for a couple of questions at the end of each of these segments. All right, without further ado, Kay, over to you. And I think you're telling us about getting it right, assessment of impact of serious incidents.
I certainly am, thank you. Can I just ask in the audience, who's ever completed a SIRS report? How much fun is it? No, but seriously, it can become a task-oriented chore that needs to be done when something serious has happened. However, we need to challenge our thinking a little bit here. So the problem that came up was that for the Commission is that providers routinely assess the impact of serious incidents as nil or minor, which is inconsistent with the detail that is provided within the report. Often that will occur when you've got somebody with cognitive impairment that can't remember the incident afterwards. So it is presumed they can't remember, so therefore there's no impact. So may I ask, and you don't have to put your hand up, but just to think about, can anybody think about their times back in school, and if they've ever been bullied, there's a person that you just try and avoid in the schoolyard. Imagine if you're living with that person in the same home 24/7. And if you're living within a particular secure unit, so you've got very confined, relatively confined area to live within, and there's somebody that has a disagreement with you and constantly is seeking you out. Now, so when we're assessing our level of impact, we can look at the serious events that might cause serious injury, but we also need to look at the ones that seem like they might not be very harmful in the first instance. But imagine if that is then happening over a long period of time. Just because the person doesn't remember the incident doesn't mean that they're not left with those residual feelings. So this is a really powerful thing to consider. So when we're looking at our incident reports and saying that there has been no impact because they can't remember the incident, we may not be correct. We need to look further and we need to look deeper. So throughout the workshop, we were encouraged to walk in the shoes of the older person, just to complete that whole understanding of that potential impact of an incident. There's often a limited understanding of what that impact might be. So we need to get better at looking for the cues. And it might be a week later, and it might be difficult to reflect that back to the initial incident, but we really need to dig a bit deeper. So we may write on a report that the impact was not obvious at this time, but we need to put strategies in place to show that we're going to continue to monitor that, because there may well be additional impacts that are not at first realised. We walked through a few different examples, impacts that could be physical, psychological or financial, and they may be immediate, delayed or short-term or ongoing. So for neglect, think about, what that impact is for that person, what has happened if they're feeling like they can't ask for help to go to the toilet because they're feeling intimidated, or if they've developed a pressure injury because they're too scared to ask someone to help them to move when they're feeling uncomfortable. So they are instances of neglect. For sexual incidents, consider consent, trauma, past traumas and with the associated re-traumatisation, and access to post-assault support, as well as the potential for sexually transmitted diseases. And how does the cultural background also impact on the life experience for that person? As a nurse in emergency, I once looked after a lady from a Middle Eastern country, and we asked her to put on a hospital gown. She put it on over the top of her clothes because she couldn't be seen by somebody other than her husband without being fully dressed. So somebody like that, particularly, to have some kind of sexual assault would have possibly a deeper impact than for another person. This was the biggest thing. The lack of memory does not mean there's no impact. So for the person with cognitive impairment or somebody trying to inform an understanding of what has happened, impact can be experienced and continued even if there is no memory of the incident. So the Commission will be interested in SIRS reports that have a fairly high or seem to have a high impact description of what's happening, and then the incongruence that may occur if we say that there's no ongoing impact. So they'll be asking more questions about that. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Kay. All right. Well, yes, absolutely. And we'll congratulate each of them at the conclusion of this. We've got time now for questions, and I'll ask the first, and I'll ask it of Brian because I know he'd be up for it. No, don't look like that. The common theme between the three of you, if I were to venture a view on that, would be walking in the shoes of the older person. And Brian, my question for you is, you specialise in services for homeless people. How do you cultivate in staff that keen sense of placing themselves in the individual shoes for whom they're providing care, because they present with a range of unusual and unfamiliar expectations and identities?
Yeah, it's a hard question, but I think it goes back to the very early days, 40 years ago, when I started Wintry. I picked an empowerment model. So that empowerment model is that I empower my staff, who then empower their staff and eventually empowers the clients. So that means the staff doesn't necessarily have to understand the everything that the client's been through, the older person's been through, but they are empowered to stop, to listen and to learn and to respect. The other issue is that most of our guys have had such interesting lives, such fascinating lives, that you'd have to be half dead not to want to sit, listen and talk to them. So we encourage that too. And I think there's also a role of leadership. I spend part of every day at one of the sites somewhere, and I think the staff see that and that they're empowered to do it as well. So
Good on you.
and I go the same thing. I go out to home care. So I think that similar questions to that.
Alison, do you have a perspective on this, empowering staff or inviting them to understand what is happening for the consumer, the person receiving care, and ensuring that staff have a really lively sense of that as they go about delivering care?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that we are very client-focused, very consumer-focused. So that whole walking in the shoes of the consumer is so important. And one of the ways of doing that is when you talk to staff, we're talking about specific examples and how would that person feel, or pop yourself in their position. How would you feel if this had occurred to you or it was your family member? And what would you like us to do about it? You know, what would you like to see happen if it was you who was affected or your family member? So I think that, you know, making it really personable and reflecting is really important. It's not just, as someone was saying over the last couple of days, it's not just about the task. It's actually the person.
Okay, you're nodding. What's your view on this?
Yeah, look, I think if we approach everything from that point of empathy, which is coming through really strong, because that means you are able to put yourself in the other person's shoes, and we need to then give our staff a chance to reflect on something that hasn't worked well, if there's been a complaint. And we need to work through that with them, not in a punitive way, but in a teaching way, so that they don't feel embarrassed or feel like they're going to get into trouble by talking to us about some issue that has arisen, or if we hear it from a client. So we really need to take that focus as a teaching experience, because nobody goes to work wanting to be antagonistic or have a bad day. They all want to do the best for our consumers, customers, clients, residents.
Whatever we choose to call them, absolutely. Brian, you've got something
I was just going to add one more comment, and that is that, and I'm sure everybody in this audience would say the same thing, but in our case, I say to our staff, they're really special. They're doing stuff that no one else in the aged care sector is prepared to do. Now, that's not might be true. May well other people are prepared to do it, but I tell them that they are really special, because the reason people are homeless and not in aged care is that aged care has made a decision not to take them, right? So if they come to us, that means the staff must be really special. And I continually tell them they're really special, and after a while they believe it.
Because they are.
And they are.
Thank you. Yeah, that deserves a round of applause. All right, we might close this session there. Please join me in thanking Alison, Brian and Kay, and we'll get them off the stage and get the next trio underway. Thank you all. Thank you. I have been joined by three more panellists. Let me introduce them. Sandra Glazer from Southern Cross Care Queensland is my closest to me. Rebecca Barmforth from Jewish Community Services, and Dr. Melanie Roth, Chief Clinical Advisor of the Commission, who looks like she was dragooned into this show and is going to do a champion job. So, you are, I'm not sure what the general topic was, but we've clustered you together. The areas that you are addressing separately are quality care in rural and remote, which is Sandra's topic, making it real, culturally safe care for every old Australian, which is Rebecca's, and then Melanie's going to deal with caring for people with dementia. So let's kick off, Sandra, with you, quality care in rural and remote services.
Thank you, Janet, and thanks everyone for sticking around, and I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful afternoon. Flights and cars and everything can wait a little bit longer. Our workshop focus was really interesting, identifying challenges and examples of good practice in quality aged care in rural and remote services. Anthony Speed did try to keep us on track, but not surprisingly, we diverted. We basically talked about the importance of engagement and trusted relationships, particularly when you think about rural, remote and living in First Nation and working in First Nation communities. where relationship and trusted relationships is really, really important. But that relationship, and I think you've heard the theme over the last couple of days, goes beyond the relationship between the service provider and the person who's receiving those care and services. It's every stakeholder, it's every member of the community, it's the Commission, and I can't speak highly enough of the need to ensure that those trusted relationships, open, transparent communications occur at every level. Because ultimately, together we will all strive to improve services for the older Australian, and that's the aim that we all have, whether you're working in rural, remote, metropolitan, we all want the same aim. So we sort of did digress a little bit. When we looked at the key themes, we acknowledged, and I think it came through loud and clear yesterday as well, when we were talking about the challenges of working in a rural, remote First Nations community. There are specific challenges there. If you've got a remote service, I'm thinking about working on community, Mornington Island, Doco River, there's lots of these small nation communities. You have a fly-in, fly-out workforce. It can be seen to be an unsafe environment. For sure, the money, because most often you're using agency staff, the money is good, but we actually want people who are committed to working in those communities. Without commitment, if you're relying on an agency workforce, and I'm not saying agency workforce is not committed, but if you're relying on an agency workforce that isn't committed, or a workforce that isn't committed, you will not get continuity of care and you will not get good resident outcomes. And again, I think that feeds back into the engagement and the trusted relationships. So apart from the workforce recruitment retention challenges faced in rural, remote, and also in metropolitan areas, there's the housing challenges that we face. You might be able to get a workforce, but where do they live? The revised regulatory framework that, the Commission have said over this last couple of days, please talk with us. We want to be able to enable you to embed the regulatory framework. So it's really important that we do speak out and we do say to the Commission, hey, you've been talking about, for example, First Nations and NATSIFAC funded services. These are the specific challenges that we have when it comes to introducing something like a single assessment framework, making sure that engagement occurs with the community, having families coming in and being part of that community, and being able to safely take residents out of a residential aged care service into community. We did talk a little bit, and I did ask the question of Anthony about the training and development for the quality assessors, because just like workforce needs to have specific training, and again, I'm thinking particularly around First Nations, it's really important that the quality assessors training program also incorporates training on cultural competency, and that it's specific to each community that you go in, because a community yesterday, we heard from Wendy Hubbard about, land communities and water communities. They have different ways of looking at the world and living in their community. And so it's easy to say, well, I've done cultural competency training, and this goes for everybody, but it has to be specific to the area that you're going into. I'm not sure how much more time I have. We talked about lots of other things too.
Thank you. Just before we move on to the next speaker, I wonder whether we can restore the timer, please. That is a useful device to assist
just another
us.
technical request. Great, we're
Okay.
in action.
Well done. Thank you so much, Sandra. Okay, moving on to Rebecca. Rebecca, you're talking to us about making it real, culturally safe care for every old Australian.
Thanks very much. That was a really good introduction to discussing culturally safe care, given that we touched on the First Nations needs. So just as an introduction to it, we had a facilitator of Lisa Peterson and panellists of Andrea Kelly, Nikki Barth, Dr. Kate Smith and Mary Petsetsos. Sorry, Mary. And the focus of the workshop was to join the Commission and First Nations called and LGBTQI plus partners for practical advice on providing culturally safe care for all older people. And I have to say that it was an absolute delight to be part of this workshop. It was a workshop that had a lot of really good conversation and engagement from people who were present. And one of the early things that was raised by the lovely Nikki Bath was the importance of kindness and curiosity. Kindness and curiosity are key when you are attempting to provide culturally safe care. We talked about the need to recognise that culturally safe care is broad and applies to everybody, because each person that we provide care to has their own cultural needs, whether or not they identify them as being cultural needs. So individual conversations and meaningful conversations are absolutely vital. We had a fantastic little chat, introductory chat about yarning, and I would love to encourage everybody in your organisations to learn more about yarning. What we've heard is that within 4 to 5 minutes of a yarning conversation, you can establish a connection that will support open communication, which helps you break down the barriers that limit people's willingness to talk about what their needs might be. So we also touched on the fact that trauma-informed care is absolutely crucial to culturally safe care. And we talked about the fact that in the context of culturally safe care, people will not always be wanting you to put the information they share with you into their care plan or into their client file. It's really important to gain consent before you add information, and to consider the fact that maybe there is something that's very important or very personal to them that perhaps their family do not know about, or that they're concerned that there will be some prejudice from some staff if that's included. So there's a lot of trust and communication that's required. We discussed that everyone has a role, from the frontline workers through the executive and the boards. And we talked about how if we focus on the providers meeting the needs that are set out by the Commission and clinical needs, we can sometimes just skip over that really intimate detail that will unpack preferences. And it's so important not to have that happen, because recognising diversity and creating inclusion, not just for our clients but for our workforce, creates a happy and cohesive unit that work together for the well-being of all. So don't take a one-size-fits-all approach, it was the message. There was a very clear message from the First Nations people that this needs to be applied to the assessors as well, that some of the questions that they ask have been culturally unsafe for some communities. And we discussed a couple of resources that can be used that I want to quickly mention. One is the About Me, another is Sunflower Tool, Yarning obviously, Telstra Help, and then the Good Spirit, Good Life assessment, which is part of some research that is very worth looking into.
Oh, well done. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm getting a sense of another theme emerging here, and Melanie, I expect you'll reinforce it, but you're going to talk to us about caring for people with dementia.
So it's a little bit of a conflict of interest telling you the key takeaways were the key takeaways I wanted to be the key takeaways, but I'm actually going to tell you about the key takeaways that were fed back to us at the end on the little post-it notes, lest you think there's a bit of a bias here. So our workshop was on caring for people with dementia, and with us we had Jenny Summerton from Dementia Support Australia. In the room we also had Isabel Meyer from Dementia Training Australia, and of course we had Megan Cox and Lauren De Vries from our Restrictive Practices and Behaviour Support Unit. The approach we took was to give a very brief overview of dementia and how it affects what the person does and thinks and acts and how they function. Really very quick. And we also then had interspersed throughout a discussion on what are the key elements of a behaviour support plan, if you like, but a behaviour support document, or if you don't need a behaviour support plan, how you can support behaviour and how that would be included in the care plan. But what are the key elements and what's the purpose of it? And the purpose, of course, is not to tell the Commission you've got one. The purpose is to guide the care of that individual. And so the individualisation of it is absolutely key to being able to use it effectively. And we aim to demonstrate that in this workshop. So the first thing we had...
Just move it slightly back.
Sorry, thank you. First thing we had was 5 different scenarios with 5 different individuals, all presenting what we hear and what we see are challenges for staff. And they were framed the way we see them framed, in that one person was aggressive, one person was sexually inappropriate, one person was resistive. And we gave a very small bit of information about each person. And then we had guided questions, and we wanted that reported back to the group. So I'm just going to tell you what the guided questions were, because they were the same guided questions for a wide variety of individuals and situations. And the message was that if we could help staff to think in this way, it would really help in the development of understanding people as individuals, documenting that, and being able to develop a behaviour support plan that was truly person-centred and effective. So the questions were: what might the resident be feeling and thinking? What has changed in the brain function with the dementia that might be contributing to the behaviour, such things as perception, insight, interpretation, memory, orientation, communication and judgment? How might staff be helped to better understand the situation? How can staff attitude and judgment and how they describe the resident and the behaviour be addressed? What could be in the resident's background that might be impacting? How might families or next of kin impact the thinking of staff and the care that's provided? What might be another way to describe the way somebody is behaving, and what background information about the resident might change the interpretation of the behaviour, including from family and friends? And I can't tell you how amazing the creative thinking and how truly the people in our group got it. And I don't think... well, maybe they were just a very special group of people, but it didn't seem to be things that other people couldn't do. And to change the way of thinking from the person's perspective, which goes back to the walking in the shoes theme, was really, really powerful. And the takeaways that our group came up with was that it's important to demonstrate empathy and remember the basic principles of decency, respect and kindness, because a person can still perceive and respond to and understand those things long after they're not able to interpret other things around them and what people are saying. That a greater understanding of dementia generally and how it affects people as individuals is important to frame issues with staff and to adjust care as appropriate for that person. That individuals will experience different things based on their previous experiences, including possible trauma. And that goes to how you solve the problems for each individual. And a very key takeaway from that was that a person is not a problem to be solved. A person has a problem that they need help solving, and that problem might be different throughout the day. It's not going to be one response to one problem, because they're people with complex issues and needs as much as the rest of us. The second activity I'll just go to briefly because I won't unpack it in such detail, but we had a description of somebody who was new to the service, and each of the 5 groups got progressively more information, and they were asked to give a quick 3-minute handover to an agency staff member about how best to support the resident. And the last group was so amazing because they had got all of the information that they needed, and they were able to do such creative things with it that I actually did want to sign up and live in that home by the end of it. So we had great engagement.
Oh, wonderful. That's fantastic, isn't it? I'll invite you to thank the panel in a moment, but first a question. And I'm going to ask you, Melanie, but the others of you might want to chime in. I'm reminded of a quote from Marie McCabe, our Advisory Council Chair and the outgoing CEO of Dementia Australia, who says frequently, if you get it right for people with dementia, you get it right for everyone. And I wonder, was that coming through in the discussion as well? Because I hear echoes of that in each of the 3 feedbacks.
I think it was. I think it's just, it needs more thought and more engagement to get it right for people with dementia, because they can't tell you that, you know, they may be much less able to advocate for themselves. So we have to try and understand what they might be trying to tell us by what they're doing, or what might make them have a better life or a better day based on what we can find out about them, or trial and error. Much more tricky than somebody who can tell you that. And if we're getting it right for them, and we're caring enough to find out on behalf of someone, then we're much more likely to be getting it right for everybody.
And
the rest of you.
just
Yes,
jump in there.
please.
And I think it's important to speak with the whole of the staff, because we've all got our own experiences. We've all lived in a world. And I'll give you an example. So my uncle in Italy would get up in the morning early, about 4 o'clock, put his clothes over his pyjamas, get up, feed the hens, come back in, bread and butter for his breakfast before he would go and have a shower, and his day progressed. And we had a gentleman come in who was living with dementia, an Italian fellow, was doing exactly the same behaviours, and people going, I went, actually, I'm seeing what my uncle would do. And I don't see this as being anything different. Maybe we need to go back and have a little look at what was his life like before he came in, and what were his behaviours before he even was living with dementia. Take it back that step further.
Oh, that's interesting. Rebecca, anything to add?
I just wanted to add to the idea that get the dementia care right, and you get it right for everybody. It's similar with diversity. The needs of each of the groups that were present were consistent. They need choice, they need agency, and they need time. And the consequences of not providing those things are enormous. But when we see each person as an individual, and we genuinely engage and care about their needs and preferences, then we provide good care.
Yeah. I'll take one more question and then we'll wrap up. There are others, of course, and we will use these to inform any additional information we make available more generally. Let me go to the question that's been put in terms of culture awareness training. Now, it has a mixed reputation, I think it'd be fair to say, and it depends sometimes on the provider of choice, but also what the organisation is seeking to do with that training, because I think all of you would have concluded in your own way that a one-off, yes, we've trained the staff, that happened January last year, isn't actually going to fit the bill. So I wonder whether any of you, and I'll invite one of you to talk to this, what are the tips and tricks in relation to building staff competency in culturally safe, culturally competent practice? Do any of you have any insights here, or is it something that we, the Commission, should take away and consult with the sector about more widely? Rebecca, do you?
I really am pleased to be able to reflect on this just from my experience of joining the Jewish community in South Australia. I learned a lot very quickly because I was given the opportunity to learn from people from the community about the general, broad aspects that I needed to be mindful of. We had a marvellous orientation at the Holocaust Museum, which was just so rich and beneficial. And then I walked in to meet a lady who had her own different, unique perspective on things because she came from a particular country and a particular region. And so culturally safe care is very much individual. It's really important and very valuable to learn about the big picture that the particular group that you are serving or the groups that you are providing care for need. But in that context, you also need to see the individual and their preferences.
Oh, how very true. All right, that brings us to the end of this second segment. Please join me in thanking Sandra, Rebecca and Melanie. Thank you, guys. See you later. All right. This session, we're going to deal with connecting the dots, governance, financial management, quality of care. and Leanne Babick from City of Marion is going to talk to that. And then we have shifting the regulatory gaze from services to providers, and Birgit Goetz from Martin Luther Homes, Baronia, is going to talk to that. And third and finally, turning data into insights. The Deputy Commissioner, Lisa Peterson, is going to talk to that. So, without further ado, Leanne, let's lead us off with connecting the dots, governance, financial management and quality of care.
Thank you, Janet. It's been a pleasure to be here, but I'm actually going to start off with something that really rang true and sort of summarised the whole workshop for me. It was Michael Lyle's comments this morning about reinvesting, the organisation reinvesting into good quality care. And that includes, for me, also training your staff to be able to provide good quality care. So I'll launch into what we discussed at the workshop. So Peter Edwards, from the Compliance Management Group from the Commission, led the panel and led the discussion, and also sold it to me today. So thank you, Peter. So we had a shared interest in getting the best outcomes for older Australians. And it was through the lens of really a good value, a strong financial governance, and being able to report to the board, and also disclosing our financials to our consumers. And then the second point that came out of the group was board members need a good understanding of their responsibilities, both in terms of the Aged Care Act and other legislative requirements. I'm going to add there that really the board's responsibility is driving also the culture of the organisation. I believe that it does start at the top, and that was a sentiment shared by all the participants in the group. So the third point was the workshop really agreed that the management of aged care services is a complex one. And we do need a careful coordination across a whole range of inputs to make sure that we are delivering, as organisations, safe, quality care. There was a discussion, so the fourth point was a discussion on the better understanding of the difference and complementary roles of the board members and executive staff. I'm going to add there a comment that I've heard throughout my own personal board journey: noses in, fingers out. So be curious, come with a curious mind. And one way that we come as a curious mind as a board is to educate ourselves. Right at this moment, I'm actually going to plug something that I found very valuable, and that was the Governing for Reforms program that is currently on the Aged Care website. If you are an emerging board member or wish to be one, or you're a current one and you just wish for a refresher, it's a fabulous tool. There's all sorts of items on that tool. I'm just having a look. Okay, I've got one and a little bit minutes. Now, the finances is just one part of the journey, and it's really quite important that we have a balanced scorecard. So that includes your qualitative, your quantitative data, looking at what your customers and what your staff are thinking, and inviting executives to the board meetings. So just don't isolate your finances in one part and get it all mixed up with your operations. Include it. And that formed your whole story. Then there was agreement from the sector that there's benefits of having some form of principles-based guide to support different providers, to share their understanding of what good financial governance looks like. And the Commission actually helps to support some of what that looks like and financial information on their website. There was one more point, but I think that's enough.
That's really interesting. And you delve into an area that we probably don't talk about enough, I think. And it sounds like the workshop covered the field really effectively. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next speaker. So we have Birgit Goetz. Birgit, you're going to talk to us about shifting the regulatory gaze from services to providers. What did you cover?
That is a very scary subject. And as a former clinician, I thought the title should have been Prevention is Better Than Cure. Because trying to see what the Commission actually wants to do, it makes actually, with my former nursing background, a lot of sense. So all what they want to do and what the title is saying, they want to move away from a issue-based management to a risk-based management approach, which basically means let's identify any potential issues that are coming up before they cause harm, and let's be proactive rather than trying to wait that something has happened, the Commission has to step in, and we know what happens then. Do you like that?
We know what happens then. Okay, let's keep going.
So basically what they are saying is that when we have looked traditionally through a service lens, that is really at the end. So the provider is the one who has the power in leadership, who has the governance and the systems. So they are the ones that will be aware of potential risk, or should be aware, because if they don't have the systems, then that provider has an issue, but it is that service that is actually suffering the impact. So that basically was what the workshop was about, for us to understand that paradigm shift the Commission is undergoing. And the beautiful thing for me as a senior executive was that I actually can go back to my staff now and say, do you know what, all this data that you need to collect, all this data that you need to provide on a regular basis is actually not going into a dark hole. That data is actually needed now to support us as a provider to identify proactively any risks. And I think it is through this positive view that we actually need to approach our quarterly data, prudential audits, and whatever we are doing. So we had the group itself was actually very mixed. There were resi care providers, multiple sites, single sites, and then there were also home care service providers and some others. So what we asked the Commission was, let us know if you see a risk, if you are concerned about something, please communicate that at the earliest possibility. It's either because we're already working on it, or we are maybe looking at something, it hasn't hit our radar. So please let us know as soon as your flags are coming up. So basically what we were asking for is for better communication. The other thing that we were saying is, like, we maybe need to shift the focus from there is a potential risk or an incident, and this is all really, really bad. We thought it might be worthwhile of putting that spin on, okay, there's an opportunity to improve. Let's look at it positively, share that learning, rather than keep that learning at provider X, because we all are working in the same industry. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So again, we are asking for more and better improved communication. I think what I heard from the providers that were there, we want a collaboration and we want that partnership with the Commission, because we do understand and we want to assist you in providing that safe environment and gaining that trust, because we all want the same thing, and that is the best outcome for our residents. Okay. And closing off, somebody just said to me, if you are from the acute care sector, the question will be whether or not we are actually moving one day to the reporting of the near misses. I think everybody of us who has ever worked in hospitals knows exactly what that sentence means. And I thought that was actually a very good approach. We possibly should start sooner rather than later.
And that you've ended with a really interesting insight, having worked extensively across the health sector. I know, again, what you're saying, and it's something that I raise from time to time when I'm talking with providers. Do you know anything about, do you have any visibility of the things that could have gone wrong but didn't, luckily? And what use are you making those of those as a learning experience? Well, thank you, Birgit. Wonderful. And last in this trio is Lisa Peterson. Lisa, you're going to talk to us about turning data into insights.
I am. Thank you very much, Janet, and hi, everybody. I'm a ring-in this afternoon. We did have a workshop participant who was going to speak to you, but unfortunately flights were changed, so you've got me. Our session was a really interesting one where we talked about, and there are a lot of themes from your presentation that really resonate with some of the things that I want to talk about. We talked about data, which of course is the information that we collect, and it can be quantitative, so, you know, your quality indicators, that sort of thing. But we also talked about the importance of qualitative data and what that can tell us. And then the room sort of reflected providers are collecting a huge amount of information and reporting quite a bit of that to the department and to the commission. And so the challenge then is to work out in all that data that you're collecting, what does that tell you? So we talked about the importance of analysis in terms of looking at the data and working out what it means. And the reflection of the room was that analysis shouldn't just be statistical. So an increase in a data series, so, you know, you've got a change in hospitalisations or falls or something like that, doesn't really tell you much except that there has been a change. And so we talked about the need to unpack that and get behind it to understand the cause. And then we spoke about insights. So this is where we take what we've learned in the analysis and we've got a message for someone through that hopefully ends in an action. And I think that was the main kind of reflection of our group, was that collecting data should be for purpose and it should drive action at the end of the day. We were super lucky to have Filomena Chavela, I hope I didn't do violence to your surname there, who is the Executive General Manager of Strategy and Quality Improvement at Regis Aged Care. And Filomena gave us a fabulous presentation where she shared much about Regis's 4-year data journey, and Filomena talked about the importance of starting from the top, so talking to the board and understanding what they needed to know about the organisation as a way of starting their data journey. She talked about defining what's important, and they worked with the older people they care for to define 4 care goals. And interestingly, they didn't use the standards. Filomena's reflection was they actually want to do better than that. And they also like the idea of care goals because it's kind of neutral to standards changing. So they've used that as a common framework for deciding what data is important to them collect. And they've developed a common way of defining data points and language. And they use a flags approach to data to account for variation. And I think everyone in the room found this really interesting because we all know in the human services game, there's always differences, you know, in what happens. So the concept there was about understanding what a reasonable variation set might be, and then looking at what falls outside that variation, and also talking about how broad or tight that range of variation might be, because that might also tell you something about the consistency of your services and processes. The really good news for everyone in our room, which did include a number of small providers, was that there's no kind of super sophisticated tools behind this. A lot of it's done with Excel, And I found this exceptionally cheering. Some staff learn to work with data through YouTube videos, so I'll be going there to lift my game. There was also a reflection on how important it was to make sure in the data that we're collecting information about the experience of the older person, and that's really critical. And the other reflection that was made was that, you know, there's so much data that we collect. Perhaps don't try and look at everything at once, you know, pick a couple of topics, do a deep dive into that, understand what's happening and why, take the actions and then move on. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about what the Commission does, and I'm just going to briefly spruik our sector performance report, which is our main vehicle for sharing with you the information that we collect from you. Through the mandatory reporting, through complaints, through incidents and through our regulatory interactions. And we talked about some of the changes we've recently made to that report, so it's much more about how we see you and less about us. We're starting to segment the data, so break it down into groups, and the idea there is so that providers can see where they might sit within those groups and compare themselves to their peers. That segmentation work so far is focused on resi, but we have work underway to do that for home care. And we've also started to present our data in a way that allows providers to calculate their own rates, and we've got some step-by-step instructions on how to do that, of things like complaints and serious incidents, so you can compare yourselves to others in the sector. And we also publish, you know, for people who really want to get into the detail, we publish all our data now as Excel tables, so you can suck it up and play with it as you'd like to. We talked a little bit about the Commission's risk models. We've just heard a little bit about that and the work that we're doing the way that we take the information and the way that we understand you and how we use that to inform our regulatory response. And I've got red numbers flashing at me, so I think I have to stop. But the one thing I do want to pass on is that we've invited the people that participated in our our workshop to join a bit of an informal network of people that are interested in data and insights and interested in hearing from the Commission about what we're doing in that space and sharing what you're doing and how we can come together. So if there are other people in the room that sounds exciting too, we'd love to hear from you. So please drop us an email at engagement.agecarequality.gov.au.
All right. Me in with an advertisement. Well done, Lisa. And it's great to take this opportunity to talk about our sector performance report, because we are cautiously optimistic. We are absolutely heading in the right direction. We've got some really nice feedback. So please check it out if you haven't looked at it and come back to us with any suggestions for improvement still. I have one question for the panel, and I'm drawing together your various contributions thematically again. If there were one way of capturing it at a high level, it might be empowering the board. You know, I'm going governance. And it seems to me that the information they now have available to them by virtue of, as Lisa said, the additional reporting arrangements, but also because of the things that they are asked to acquit in their governance role, they are better informed than they've ever been before about the operation, not just of their organisation, but their organisation compared with others. So there is the chance now, and it will grow over time, to do benchmarking. How are we operating? How are we performing compared with our peer organisations? Now, we need to get better at putting out information which enables that, but we've made an excellent start, I think. And I suppose, Leanne, maybe just start briefly with you. Is that the way you see it, that this is the time for boards to step up into that role and really draw on what is now available to ask the tough questions?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Janet. So there's the data available, there's also the information and the education available to the boards. It is at no cost, except for their time. So I think this is a time to step up. And can I just add one more thing? And this may be a personal thing, but this was one that was certainly highlighted by Sally Evans in our workshop, is that there needs to be a mind shift change from voluntary. So I just volunteer on a board. So whether it's voluntary or not, or paid however you would like to see it. We all bring a skill set, and you're bringing your expert skill set pro bono. And so that adds more value as a board member, and I think more investment in this industry, which is needed. We don't want to lose good people.
Absolutely. Lisa, you have engagements with boards from time to time, and I know this is a matter of some discussion where you ask them what use are you making, what information is coming to you, what are the questions you ask, how well informed do you feel? Do you have reflections on this particular issue?
Yeah, thanks very much, Janet. I mean, the question that I always am interested in asking is, how do boards assure themselves about what's happening on the ground at their services? So how do you know that you're delivering the kind of safe quality care that you envisage, is happening? And so I'm interested in how the questions that boards can ask to assure themselves that what they think is happening in their service is actually happening in their service.
Yeah. Birgit, any closing observations you want to make?
Look, as I'm very lucky, as I always have had a very engaged board. I think where I see the shift, or where my board sees the shift, as well, we are not-for-profit provider volunteers. You get so excited. There is a young, dynamic volunteer with professional expertise coming on the board, and the discussion shifts to, should we remunerate? So, and I think that puts a completely new dynamic on volunteer boards, and I think it's definitely something that needs to be discussed. And I think a lot of not-for-profit providers having these volunteer boards need your guidance on how we should manage it.
Okay, that's a fair comment. I'll take one final question, but I'll address it quickly because of the time. David has talked about the difficulties of translating our quarterly report into a monthly benchmark report to the board, and whether there is anything available which can be translated into a monthly report. The short answer is not yet. The slightly longer answer is we are looking at building databases which ultimately can be interactive and therefore curated by the user. And we don't promise real time. That might be a step beyond what is reasonably available to us from a resourcing standpoint in the foreseeable future. But we are looking for this dynamism so that wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever services you offer, this data set becomes more available to you, more real time than is currently the case, though not absolute real time, so that at any point you can get a sense of where you're operating compared with like services and so on. Now, this is a huge enterprise. Those of you who've built these sorts of interactive databases know just how much effort's involved. And we're at the starting position on this, but it's something that we know would be of keen interest to providers generally, and it's something that we're determined on progressing as and when we can. Lisa, any other comments on that?
No, you're absolutely right, Janet. We have the ambition. We'll try and get there.
All right. Please join me in thanking the panellists, Leanne, Birgit and Lisa. Thank you all. In the next segment, I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Amy Laffan. Richard has already introduced Amy from the department, First Assistant Secretary, and Amy is going to share some of her thoughts and insights, give you a sort of a roundup of where the department is at on many, if not all, of the things that we've discussed over the last 2 days.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sticking to it and getting to this last session. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we gather today, the Kaurna people. The past few days have given us great insight into what is happening in the aged care sector, from the perspective of government, the department, the commission, providers, and of course, from older people. I'd like to take a moment to briefly recap some of the matters that were discussed by the government and department representatives, the Minister for Aged Care, Annika Wells, and Deputy Secretary for the Department of Health and Aged Care, Michael Lai. So Minister Wells opened the conference by discussing how the principles of maintaining respect for human dignity and increasing opportunities for older people to exercise greater personal agency underscore the government's approach to reforming aged care in Australia. She highlighted how these principles are the animating force behind the reforms that have been successfully implemented over the last few years by all of us in partnership, actioning the recommendations of the Royal Commission. Reforms like registered nurses on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 200 mandatory care minutes per day per person, with more minutes to come later this year. Dollars to Care coming online on the My Aged Care website so that people can see what providers are spending their money on. And star ratings so that people can easily weigh up the quality of care offered by residential services. Minister Wells also shared the great news that providers are making demonstrable improvements to their aged care homes, increasing their star ratings. And this is evidenced by a 19% increase in homes receiving 4- and 5-star ratings from late 2022 until now. And of course, the Minister spoke about some of the significant and enduring challenges that remain in the sector, such as the issue of funding that the Aged Care Task Force has been investigating, and the forthcoming new Aged Care Act that has been recently consulted on. Both the funding question and the new Aged Care Act are central to reforming the aged care system and putting things on a firm, enduring and predictable foundation, something that is near and dear to the hearts of providers and older people alike. While the government is still considering its response to the task force recommendations, the Minister was able to share with us that government would continue to be the primary funder of aged care for older people in Australia. Deputy Secretary Michael Lai from the department took the opportunity to look back on the state of the aged care system prior to the current round of reforms. He spoke about how the sector was in the realm of chaos for decades as it suffered from prolonged systemic failures that affected many different aspects in many different ways. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Michael also discussed how far things have come in the past few years, using the analogy of green shoots to highlight the various ways that things have been changing. Some of these green shoots include measures that the department has taken to increase transparency and to increase ease of access to the system, such as building our presence in regional areas. He was pleased to note that the experience of people in aged care seems to be improving. One of the ways we track the improvement is through regular resident experience surveys. The most recent survey was positive, with indicators that the impression older people have of the quality of their aged care service has improved in 2023 versus 2022. It found that a significant proportion of people would recommend their aged care home to someone they knew. What a great outcome. To my mind, there are a few better indicators than that to show that things are improving. People vote with their feet, and if they're telling people that their experience is better, then it probably is. So what's next for the sector? I've already mentioned that the Minister highlighted about the major reforms that are outstanding, namely the Act and the response to the task force recommendations. I'd like to briefly talk about the new Act and the consultation and the feedback that we received. There are some key themes that consistently emerged during the consultation that demonstrated what people are thinking about and where their concerns lie. The most common matters that were raised were the timing needed to implement the new Aged Care Act, supported decision-making, whistleblowing protections, and the new definition of high-quality care arrangements in place. Board members and people in positions of responsibility with new duties to act with due diligence to ensure that aged care providers do not cause adverse effects to the health and safety of older people in their care. And what level of independence will be afforded to the Complaints Commissioner. It's fair to say that on a number of matters we received divergent and sometimes conflicting views. All are valid and are subject to deep consideration by my team in the department and government. There is, however, common ground. As the Commissioner reflected in her presentation yesterday morning, the government, department, commission, providers, workers and consumers all share common desired outcomes. And I am confident we'll find the right balance of these in the new Aged Care Act. As we've heard, the new Act will bring along with it a new regulatory model. A big part of our work at the moment is locking down the final details and preparing the model for implementation so that we can ensure a smooth transition. Under the new regulatory model, all government-funded aged care providers will be registered, including Commonwealth Home Support Program and the NATCFAC program. The regulatory model will work hand in glove with the strengthened aged care quality standards that will apply to specific registration categories. The quality standards will give context to the registration categories and will outline what standard of care older people can expect to receive. Importantly, these will be enforceable and will include specific actions that providers are required to evidence that they are complying with. Beyond these matters, we plan to keep going with the reform journey. One of the other upcoming changes that will be significant for both providers and older people is the Support at Home program. This program will come into effect from the 1st of July 2025 and will replace the existing home care packages program and the short-term restorative care program, while the Commonwealth Home Support Program will transition to Support at Home at some point after the 1st of July 2027. Like many of our other reforms, this is in response to the Royal Commission, and it is intended to improve access to services, equipment and home modifications to help older people remain healthy, active and socially connected to their community. The Department will continue to work with existing providers to ensure that they are prepared to transition to Support at Home well ahead of the start date on 1st of July 2025. We will also work with you so that you are ready to transition from the Commonwealth Home Support Program to the new program, using a staged approach to give you time to change your business systems and to adjust your payment arrangements while minimising disruption. This is a characteristic of our approach across the board. We know that it is challenging to adapt to many of these changes, and we're not here to make it harder for anyone. We can see how hard you're working to implement the reforms. I was really encouraged by yesterday's discussion on what the reforms mean for providers and what is already being done to prepare. I also heard the cautious optimism, particularly when Julia Lawrence of St Vincent said that they are really confident, but also really nervous. If you are having trouble, reach out. We will work with you and see what we can do to help you position yourself to meet the new requirements and for your services to flourish in the new era. In summary, we continue to see positive signs that the health of the aged care system is improving. There are major reforms still in motion, but the pieces that are in place so far seem to be beginning to work to improve things for providers, for older Australians and their families and carers. We do have a way to go yet, but it is heartening to see that the commitment from providers matches the commitment from government and the department to get this right for the benefit of everyone who comes in contact with the system. I thank you all for your ongoing efforts, and I thank the Commission for hosting this conference.
This one. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Well done and succinctly expressed. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'm not sure that there are any from the audience, so I will venture forth. I know that having worked closely with the department and certainly working closely with you and your colleagues, that you have also been on a bit of a journey, that the department has looked carefully at where you need to lift, and that the Royal Commission had things to say to you as the system governor, and that you are working hard on yourselves. I'm not asking you to disclose state secrets, but that is the case, isn't it? That you're also working furiously hard to be the best system regulator, system governor you can be.
Absolutely. And I think that was really captured in what Michael said this morning. We got to the stage of a Royal Commission because there was inadequacies in a lot of places. So Michael talked about the us having regional contacts so that we can speak to providers in regional areas. We're now trying to fix the access to the system. We know that that's really hard and complicated for people at a very stressful time. So having people to talk to in Services Australia, fixing our My Aged Care system, making it easier to navigate and use, but also the things that we need to do as stewards of the system long term. So a lot of work has gone into the market and the financial viability of the sector, and knowing what is happening so that we can ensure a healthy sector for the long term.
You have a fair bit to do with Minister Annika Wells. In her presentation yesterday morning, she talked about seeing the fruits of everyone's endeavours, and she was very grateful to the sector for the effort that is being put in. Are you seeing the same thing? I mean, I know Michael spoke about it this morning and you used the reference green shoots, but from your perspective at your level, with all of your colleagues working at your level, are you seeing the same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's what keeps us encouraged and knowing that it's worth continuing, because we see those green shoots. We're seeing those little improvements. We're seeing we've got transparency that we've never had before. And then that transparency quarter on quarter is showing improvements both in terms of financial viability and the quality of services. And it just gives us that incentive to keep going.
And the new Act is obviously an enormous milestone. I mean, very significant, and certainly has taken up time and effort and significant resources by the department over an extended period. And I expect all of you are looking a bit frayed at the edges as a result of that. But as I was saying in my opening presentation yesterday, at the end of the day, it's words on a page. And the animation of the principles and the concepts, but also the practices in the new Act, is where it's going to count. And in your mind, and we don't yet know the date of introduction, and that is obviously for government to determine, but that's not the end of the journey, is it?
Absolutely not. So as well as the primary legislation, we have subordinate legislation, and then we'll have a whole lot of directed engagement activities to help with implementation. And we're hoping to have schedules and things like, start doing this now, this is what you need to do to prepare. Here is a document that's easy to understand about how to prepare for this, and kind of learning from things that the Commission has done and having different resources for different people. So there should be resources for boards, for managers, for workers themselves, and for families and older people as well.
I'm going to ask you a question which is quite popular that you can see on the screen here at the top one. How can the stay-at-home program be rolled out if the Aged Care Act is now delayed? The stay-at-home is underpinned by the Act. Now, that's at one level, that's a technical answer, but can you answer the broad? Because I know that would be a question in a lot of people's minds.
And that is absolutely something that we're aware of. Government has made the commitment for a 1st of July 2025 start, and we believe that we can achieve that.
All right, that was succinct. Well done. And then we've got another very specific one. When will national benchmarks for the last 5 national quality indicators, introduced April 2023, be available, as is for the other indicators?
Oh, that's a very specific question.
It is.
So I know that we are now in so I think our most recent report, or the report that's coming out soon, definitely starts to provide more detail on those 5 new indicators. Not quite sure when the benchmarking will come out. Ingrid from my team might yell at me and tell me something differently. But yeah, that's really important that we get the benchmarking, we get some data maturity there, because I think then the next question that flows from that is, when will they be part of the star rating system as well? So sorry, I couldn't answer that.
No, that's well done for having a go. There's a really important question here about the data. Is there government willingness to support the development of a national aged care quality/risk management/reporting system, which can be utilised by all aged care providers? Now, this is a worthy endeavour, and I know that there is work underway. Can you sketch that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we don't want to be gatekeepers of data. We think that that data certainly has usefulness to not just, service providers, but the whole of the community, researchers, etc. So as we're getting our transparency measures right and our data collection tools and reporting right, we will be looking at how we can make that public and how we can bring it all together to tell a cohesive story as well.
Last question, and then it's another one for detail, and I'm not sure how well placed you are to answer it. It's in relation to the HCP system, home care package system, and the question is, what will grandfathering of that system look like when supported home comes in? How long will be expected to run 2 systems? So
that is detail that I was going to say we don't know yet, but maybe it's just me that doesn't know that yet. As part of the legislative process, so we not only have the bill that you've seen the exposure draft of, but we will have a consequentials and transitionals bill. And that will talk about how we deal with people currently in the system, when there'll be cut-over dates and all of those sorts of things. So that information will be available as the Act goes through Parliament.
All right, we might bring it to a close there. Amy, thank you for being a trooper about it, coming in on the end of a long program and trying to do a deft summary of a very large body of work is always going to be a challenge. I think you've managed it very capably. Please join me in thanking Amy Laffan from the department. We come to the final stages of the program, and thank you very much for staying the course. But thank you also for contributing so effectively and energetically to the development and delivery of the program. We always knew that the value of what we were doing was going to be relying in large part on the input that you brought to the exercise. And in speaking with my staff, and my own observations are that you came ready to contribute and you have been very active participants. And I thank you for that, because I hope that has made it a far more successful and effective use of your time over the last 2 and possibly even 3 days if you were in the pre-conference workshops. I'm not going to attempt the heroic and rather futile effort to summarise succinctly what has happened over the last 3 days. That would really be a fool's errand. So what I am going to do is to take us briefly back to where I started, and to reflect on the trust deficit that is currently in place, and to note the obvious, which is we can't magic that into something different. To be trusted, you must be trustworthy, and my question to all of us is, are we collectively trustworthy? And what can we do to earn that trust? What we can do is make good on our obligations and our commitments, reaching beyond compliance towards excellence. And I say we, and I include the regulator in that comment. In so doing, we can close the gap between what older people expect and hope and what they experience in care. Not just now or this month, but every day. And in achieving that, we will earn greater trust in aged care, because what's in the jar is on the label. You asked yesterday morning what the Commission is doing to build trust and confidence in aged care. And I set out for you our regulatory strategy, focusing on prevention and response. And we have to be really good at both of those things. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And our success is indivisibly tied to the choices and decisions you make and the actions you take. So hear me on this. Your direction of travel is your call. You can decide whether you go up or down the diamond. So we in the Commission will offer fit-for-purpose information and guidance and education, and we will consult with you to make sure it hits the mark and helps you know what you need to do and do it well, in partnership with the people for whom you provide care. And it will also allow you to understand our expectations of what you will do when something goes wrong. Do you remember the 3 words? Remedy, restore, prevent. We've all spent time over the last 2 days here learning and talking about and sharing insights on aspects of the new Act, provider registration and renewal, strength and quality standards, governing bodies working with older people. But the only place, as my mother used to say, where success comes before work is in the dictionary. We're all stakeholders here. We all have work to do. Now, I've shared with you the work we're doing on lifting our capability towards best practice regulation. And the question I put back to you is, what are you doing individually? What are you doing to lift your capability towards best practice aged care? We stand ready to assist as we also fulfil our statutory obligations to hold you to account. An uninterested, reluctant or resistant provider who is not motivated to avoid problems or to fix them quickly and effectively when they occur will get to know us very well, and it won't be comfortable. But a provider who is demonstrably motivated to strive to consistently deliver good care and reach for better care is earning our trust, and earning the trust, more importantly, of the people for whom you are providing that care. I spoke yesterday about Atul Gawanda's comments about shaping the story of our lives and how each of us has an expectation and a yearning that that will be the case right to the end. The final challenge is for you to go away and think about the extent to which each of you is enabling that for every single person receiving the care that you're delivering. And if you can't answer categorically and confidently and optimistically that we, the provider, the services, the workers, are assisting that person to tell their story, to shape their own story for as long as possible, then there's some further work I want you to do. Thank you very much again for all your participation. We have learned a treasure trove from you. I hope you've gained something from it as well. I'll hand you back to Richard now to close the session. Thank you.